All right, we're all here. Welcome, welcome. Can we start just by going around and introducing ourselves? If you can just share your name, and also what your connection is to this production, to Albee. I'm Krista Williams. I am a long-term dramaturg with Transport Group, and I'm so happy you're all here. Jack, can we start with you?
Sure, I'm Jack Cummings. I am the co-founder and artistic director for Transport Group and the director of A Delicate Balance.
David?
I'm David Crespy. I'm the founding president and current treasurer of the Edward Albee Society and a professor at the University of Missouri.
And Peter.
Hi, I'm Peter Kim. I'm the creative producer of NAATCO, the National Asian American Theater Company, and we are so thrilled to be partnering with Transport Group on Edward Albee's masterpiece, A Delicate Balance.
Yay. And can we just go back around again and talk a little bit about the missions of the organizations that you all just introduced, just like Transport Group's mission, the kind of work that you're usually drawn to, Jack, what you do with Albee's work, and how you champion it, David, and NAATCO's mission and kind of vision. I would just love to hear a little bit about where you're all coming from.
Okay.
Yeah, David, great. Thank you.
I'm very delighted to be part of this conversation. The Edward Albee Society supports the continued production and study and performance of Edward Albee's works. And so we were delighted to be invited for the conversation.
Thanks. Jack?
Yes, so Transport Group, we're about 21 years old, and our mission, just to put it succinctly, is we explore American works from the 20th and 21st centuries, both plays and musicals, by American authors that are somehow delving into what it means to be a person in this country in the past and the present. And one of our missions is to explore revivals of plays in new and different ways, and who are the people telling that story, and what it means, when it was originally written, but more so what it means today, kind of bridging the past and the present together to ask more questions about what it is to be an American.
Yes. And Peter, NAATCO.
Sure. NAATCO was founded in 1989 by co-founder Mia Katigbak and Richard Ang. Succinctly, NAATCO asserts Asian American representation in the American theater. Our founding mission was to do Western classics with all Asian American actors, not as written, so not recontextualizing the material to fit a quote-unquote Asian setting. And then we've continued to do adaptations of the classics as well as world premieres of new plays. Yeah, that's us.
Yay. David, can you talk a little bit about how you think about A Delicate Balance just as an Albee specialist? What I know there's so much to talk about when it comes to Albee in terms of his influence on the American canon and on the field as a large, both kind of dramaturgically as a heightened naturalist, also thematically, the kind of the level of familial intimacy that he brought to the American stage. How do you see his influence in this particular play?
Well, first of all, I think Edward would be delighted with this production and the collaboration between Transport Theater and NAATCO. I think he would be thrilled with the casting of Asian American performers in this play. I think he cared very deeply about diversity in America as a gay man and as someone who had his own struggles. And so I think just to start off, having known Edward and worked with him and having had him write the forward to my books, I feel like this would have been something that he would have been very excited about. And I congratulate everyone involved with this historic production, because I think it's something that really fits into, I think, how Edward wanted people to continue to interpret his work. I would say that, you know, Delicate Balance is play that was a success in ways that Edward desperately needed at the time. When he wrote the play, he was coming off a very challenging moment where his play Tiny Alice did not fly with previous audiences. People just didn't understand it at all. His wonderful award-winning Who's Afraid of Virginia Woolf was denied the Pulitzer Prize. So this play was the first play of Edward Albee's to receive the Pulitzer Prize. And for many people, it was almost a consolation prize for not what he should have done, which is receive the Pulitzer Prize for Who's Afraid of Virginia Woolf. However, the one thing that I'll say is that this play also gave us a very different Edward Albee from the Albee of Who's Afraid of Virginia Woolf. It's very restrained. It is a peek into this world that was very private to Edward, the world of extreme wealth, of people who are at a level of wealth that is kind of unimaginable for most Americans. And Edward grew up with that. Edward grew up with being, you know, going to kindergarten in a Rolls Royce. He was the heir of the Keith Albee vaudeville circuit. So that is a big part of the play, is what happens when you have that kind of wealth, and how living with that wealth and living with the result of kind of cutting yourself off from the rest of the world. The other elements that are really important in this play, of course, the relationship between Tobias and Agnes, that's very closely tied to Albee's own parents, Reed and Frances Albee. And these characters come up again and again and again, from, you know, their mommy and daddy in the American dream. And then we see Albee really capped his career by taking the character that of Martha and Agnes and mommy, and it becoming the character of A, B, and C in Three Tall Women. So it's a very important work, and it is a very restrained and tight work. And it made Albee accessible to some audiences that might have been a little bit frightened from his first play, which was described as being something that would, you know, appeal to dirty-minded women, which is why Who's Afraid of Virginia Woolf was so successful at the time. So I'll end there, because I think that's kind of enough of an introduction, and I'm sure you all have really some wonderful thoughts to share about the production, which you're very intimately and artistically engaged.
Yeah, it's really interesting, that context about where it falls in his writing cycle. Before we get to like Transport Group's particular production in the rehearsal room, Jack, Peter, I know you haven't been in the rehearsal room for this production, but just, you know, what do you have a relationship with Albee's work, or what was your first introduction to his work, and how do you think of his writing when you think of his writing and kind of his impact on American theater?
I mean, it's really interesting with, you know, back in, I can't remember when exactly, but with NAATCO, Mia had actually reached out to Edward Albee to do American Dream, and they were able to do, NAATCO was able to do a kind of like in-house workshop production of the play. And so that's the company's, I'd say, first interaction with Albee. I think it may actually be the only interaction with Albee. In terms of me personally, I'm also an actor. I haven't performed much Albee myself. But Who's Afraid of Virginia Woolf has always been a project that Mia and I joke about doing together, which I think would be a pretty killer experience. Mia playing, you know, Martha, and I would not play her husband. I would play the other character.
Yeah.
Jack, what has the process been like in the room?
Definitely. I mean, I've been a director for 30 plus years, and I can say without a doubt, this is the toughest text I have ever remotely encountered. And I have directed some pretty tough stuff. I've directed Strindberg, Ibsen, Miller, Williams, Inge, and this is just a whole nother level.
What do you attribute it to? Like the challenge?
The challenge is there, and let me just say, these are thrilling challenges, and these are the types of challenges that as a young theater artist, you dream about getting the chance to tackle. So, but that said, it is definitely just the most difficult. I think that there are a couple things that make it so difficult. One easy one is just the language is difficult. The syntax, we've all talked about that a lot in the rehearsal. The syntax is difficult. The thought processes are that each of the characters have are complex and many multi-layered. And so it's a strange combination, and it's part of his genius. It does sound like the way people talk, and yet it's not the way people talk. And then every now and then there'll be a line or two that is completely the way people talk, and there's no doubt about it. Those are rare. And so it's so original and such a singular voice that is unlike any other. And so all of us working on it, we don't have any kind of like guideposts of other work we've done that are helpful necessarily, because it's so its own thing. And so you're having to approach it without any of the normal tools or precedents you'd be able to call upon to kind of help you along. When I've done a lot of Williams and I've done a lot of Inge, and those two are so closely related. And I feel like whenever I work on one of them, having worked on the other one is helpful. And none of that is available. None of those helpful things are available to any of us working on this play. So it's, but it is absolutely thrilling. But it's quite a task getting there, and one that I don't think any of us could have prepped for, other than intellectually being aware of it. But until you're trying to do it, there's nothing you can do to prep, until you're trying to make sense of it and put it on its feet and understand it. And the final thing I'll say is the relationships are so, I think, David, you use this word, they're so taut. Like the play is so taut. And so it's like it is like a very taut rope. And so if at any second, any one of us kind of like lingers a little bit, the whole thing just kind of will fall down a little bit. So, and to keep that tautness, and this is especially for the actors, but just in my role in helping them create it, to keep that tautness for 3+ hours is a huge ask that nobody is normally asked to do, quite frankly.
David, how do you think about what Jack is describing, just as somebody who's so intimate with Albee's entire body of work, just on a textual level, like, the kind of heightened theatrical poetry masquerading as normal speech, which it kind of tricks you. But the power is kind of baked into the syntax. How do you think about that? How do you talk about the way he writes dialogue?
Well, I mean, one of the things that's fascinating about Edward, and having spent a lot of time with him, he actually spent a lot of time hanging out with my kids in Columbia, Missouri, when I brought him in, and he was absolutely close to and spent a lot of time with my son Emmett, who is on the spectrum, and they seem to get along perfectly. Like they seem to understand each other perfectly. And Edward would have other behaviors around me that were very surprising, very oddball. But his connection to language, I sometimes think, comes from this strange relationship he had with language. He was obsessed with the tiniest aspects of language. He would correct people for not using the word "and" correctly. His characters seemed to coin phrases in ways like they're thinking about language, they're thinking about how to talk about things as if they really don't know what language is, and so they have to kind of reinvent it for themselves. And so there is this very weird quality. And I played Jerry in the Zoo Story in college, and for me it was a transformational experience dealing with that language, making sense of it, riding on it, being on the crest of one of those huge arias of Jerry's, and in particular the dog story. I remember really well when Rosemary Harris was doing it, and Ed Rolson at the CUNY Grad Center said he kind of quoted that first speech that she has, and just to parse out those first bits of language is so challenging. And it's also very much tied to the fact that for Edward, like a lot of the writers that were coming over from Europe from that time, and in particular, I'm thinking of Beckett and Ionesco, but certainly Genet and Howard Pinter, language was this very dangerous thing that they didn't trust, and at the same time they obsessed over. This is kind of part and parcel of being part of this absurdist tradition. And interestingly enough, Albee did refer to this play as being naturalistic. And he said, well, I write naturalistic plays, and then I write plays that are not naturalistic, that are, he rarely used the word realistic. And so I think it mattered to him that it certainly flowed and sounded like human speech. But because of Edward's weird detachment, just as a person, if you spend time with him, he had a very different relationship to language than, let's say, Tennessee Williams, who really was using the parlance of the South and that wonderful kind of, the cadences of the South, and he was in love with that. And even Inge, who, Albee was very close with Inge. He wrote a play called Fam and Yam, which is about the differences between the two of them, and really kind of a satire. And then, of course, he was very close with Tennessee Williams, although he said to me that he regretted not being able to be closer because Tennessee was so, addicted to drugs and alcohol. But Tennessee Williams used to swim in Edward's pool on a regular basis. But I think that I don't think Edward ran away from naturalism, and he certainly never described himself as an absurdist. That's been the label that Martin Estlin gave him, along with the rest of the absurdists who didn't really think of themselves as absurdists. And really, I think that the phrase that Michael Bennett, who's the editor of our series and a wonderful Albee scholar, and particularly a scholar of absurdism, he uses a different term for what Edward and that generation are. He thinks of them as telling parables, and so he calls their work parabolic drama. And so there's nothing really nihilistic about Delicate Balance. It's not about giving up your hope. It's about giving up easiness, being and accepting that the fact that life is filled with terrifying decisions, and that life is in fact terrifying, which is what Harry and Edna walk in the door with, this dark terror. So I think that the language is about kind of getting around that terror, and understanding and wrestling with it. Edward wanted people to come to his plays that they didn't know what a play was. He didn't want to write plays that he even could totally understand. He certainly never understood Tiny Alice, and he said so. But I do think that the flow of the language, understanding it, is tied very much to Edward's love of classical music, and because Edward was kind of a playwright raised in the company of composers. He ran with a pack of composers, And so musical phrasing and modern the music of Schoenberg, for example, and chamber music, that's really how you get at Edward's language, is to understand that what he was doing was trying to compose language in a way that composers compose music that's quite challenging. That's one, one approach to think about Edward's use of language, is that he really was trying to work. I mean, his lover, his initial lover, was a composer and actually a mentee of Aaron Copland. So I think that that's one of the things to kind of bear in mind.
Yeah, that's so interesting. Just thinking about his work as parabolistic drama, and thinking about NAATCO and Transport Group's missions of how they're kind of revisiting classics. Like, Peter, do you have thoughts about how, like, what it was thematically in Delicate Balance that attracted you and Mia and NAATCO to work on this piece with Jack and Transport Group?
I think Jack could probably speak to that better, but I will say, A Delicate Balance came after NAATCO partnering with Transport Group on the trial of the Catonsville Nine. And so there's deep admiration from Mia and myself to Jack and Transport Group. I think the companies are very much in alignment in terms of values. And also what's exciting about this collaboration with The Delicate Balance is that, with Jack's approach to the classics as a director, which is it's typically these fresh kind of like modern approaches, with NAATCO's core mission of doing the classics with an all Asian American cast, it seemed like a really exciting moment and opportunity. But in terms of choosing A Delicate Balance, I'll throw that to Jack, because I think that was more in your corner.
Yeah, Jack. So Delicate Balance thematically, what we've heard David already talk about is, kind of incredible wealth and the psychology of people with extraordinary wealth, fear, intimacy, some things that might still be relevant today. Can you talk about what themes have really, like, what drew you to it, and then also maybe what surprised you once you started working on it as being extra relevant in kind of American society 2022?
Yeah, I mean, the only production I have seen was, I was just moved to New York, and I saw the Gutierrez revival with Rosemary Harris and George Broussard on Broadway, 1996, Lincoln Center's production, and it was remarkable. I mean, it was incredible to watch. I'd never seen an Albee play until that time, so it was a great way to get to know him and his writing. But the one, I took away many things from that production, but one primary thing that I took away that always stuck with me, I was really fascinated by the characters and the idea around them and the themes they brought into the play of Harry and Edna. And this idea that a playwright would have two well-off, seemingly normal characters walk into another home and say, we have to be here now because we are terrified and frightened, and they never name it. A character never even says, well, what are you frightened of? I mean, Julia would if she had her way, but I thought that was really kind of courageous writing too, because the audience, like, what are they afraid of? And they just, the play never really answers that, and so it allows your imagination and emotions to kind of run wild, and so that's kind of like thrilling. But I do think that this just to talk about all of our experiences or reference them, I guess, in the pandemic, this idea of terror, what is frightening, and they talk a lot about the Agnes says that Harry and Edna brought the plague in, and the uses the word quarantine and isolation, and then on top of all that is the idea of time passing, that Agnes talks about towards the end of the play, while the men are getting the luggage. And so I think all of those themes are, timeless and classical. So that's why this play will always live. But it does feel relevant, to me, at least in the moment we're all have lived through and are continuing to live through. So those themes really resonated for me in choosing this play.
We are basically at time, but I want to ask one more brief question from the three of you, which it's just a simple one, but like when you think about, the number of options that people have in terms of, the kinds of stories that they could expose themselves to right now, what is it about A Delicate Balance that feels urgent and that feels necessary today?
I think that in this play, as in most of Edward's plays, there's a sacrifice that's involved. There's a terrible sacrifice you must make in order to live life truly and stay alive within it and not become deadened. And I think, particularly because of COVID, because of the quarantine, because of that, the message is particularly clear. And I also think it's a powerful moment to look at the lives of these very wealthy people who, in this case, will be, cast with Asian Americans, and to kind of think about, where we are in a society, because wealth and the power and the strangeness of wealth in this age of the super wealthy it doesn't go away, and in fact in some ways it's gotten worse. And I actually think that with the advent of the new British Prime Minister, who's the first person of color who happens to come from this Indian background, the first thing that people are talking about is his wealth, which is quite often something that's attacked with Asian Americans as well. So, there's this kind of inherent racism that I think this production is going to kind of raise questions about, and how we talk about this. So I think that it's being done at a very important moment. And I think that, I think it's just a really kind of brilliant collaboration between these two theater companies. I'm really excited for that.
I'll piggyback off of what David was saying. And I think one of the urgent things about this production is also it speaks to the terror that so many Asian Americans are feeling right now, coming out of the pandemic, in terms of the violence towards Asian Americans. And something that I'll speak for myself, and I know so many of my friends and colleagues feel this way, that, because we look a certain way, people constantly assume that we're foreign, that we're not of here, that we're not American. And so this terror that is named in the play, I think, is an accurate depiction of what the community is currently feeling. And the other thing I think that I'm so excited about with this production is that NAATCO and Transport Group have this opportunity to work on this text that oftentimes people who look like me don't get that opportunity to. So the opportunity to work on this masterful writing is something that has never really happened before. And it's the cast are all stars of the Asian American theatrical community. You're going to be seeing people bringing their A game like never before.
Yeah, I think I really second what David and Peter have said. The collaborating with NAATCO is thrilling, and the multiple gifts that come with that is, personally, as an artist, as a director, am getting the chance to work with artists that I have not always worked with, have been able to work with, have had the opportunity to work with. And so to get that opportunity with these artists, with this writing, is just, and to tell this story with these people, and for the play to feel new again, you know, because of who is telling this story on stage in front of you. For me, it kind of, it just keeps expanding the deep-seated beauty of this piece. And I feel that coming out of this, the time we're living in, to use a cliche phrase, anything that I can personally be a part of that is reminding people of beauty and of very complex, nuanced thinking, which he is incredible at doing, and the gift he left all of us. I think that makes a very urgent case for people to see this in 2022.
Yes, thank you all. Come see A Delicate Balance. Thank you so much, David, for joining us from Spain. Peter, thank you for making time in your schedule. Thank you so much.